Juventus. Juventus didn't exactly start like a powerhouse. They were founded in 1897 by a bunch of teenagers from a high school in Turin who literally just wanted their own team. Imagine a group of 15-year-olds today deciding to launch a football club, and within a few decades it turns into one of the most dominant dynasties in the sport. That's Juve. Their first jerseys weren't even black and white. They wore pink, proper Barbie pink, which, honestly, if they had kept it, they'd probably be selling the most fashionable shirts in football right now. But in 1903, one of their English friends sorted them out with black and white stripes from Notts County, and that's how the iconic look was born. What makes Juve's story stand out is how they shifted from being a small local team into this symbol of power and dominance, especially after the Agnelli family, the owners of Fiat, took control. That connection basically made them the club of the establishment, the old lady of Italian football, and that's exactly why everyone else hates them. Fans of Napoli, Inter, Torino, even half the league see Juve as this smug older cousin who always has money, influence and referees on their side. And honestly, with Calciopoli in 2006, they didn't exactly kill that reputation. Their rivalry with Torino is the local one, the Derby della Mole, but the heavyweight clashes are with Inter and Napoli. Inter fans will never stop bringing up refereeing decisions, and Napoli fans see Juve as the big northern bully. For a club that started with school kids and pink shirts, they've turned into the most loved and despised team in Italy, Real Madrid. The funny thing about Real Madrid is that everyone sees them now as this polished super team, but when they started in 1902, they were literally just a group of football nerds in Madrid who wanted to play the weird English game. Back then, football wasn't Spain's thing at all. It was niche, like being into chess boxing or competitive eating. Their founders were basically the hipsters of Spanish sport. The Real in their name didn't even come until 1920, when King Alfonso XIII gave them the royal title, along with the crown on their badge. But here's the thing, other clubs got the same honour too, like Real Sociedad or Real Betis. What made Madrid different was that they turned that royal image into power, prestige, and eventually global dominance. That crown wasn't just decoration, it became part of an identity, the establishment's club, the one everyone else measured themselves against. And no rivalry fed into that image more than Barcelona. Barca wasn't just another football club. They stood for Catalan identity and resistance to central Spanish power. Over time, especially during Franco's dictatorship, El Clásico stopped being just a football match and turned into Spain's biggest political showdown. Madrid, the crown's favourite, against Barcelona, the rebels. That energy still fuels every single meeting. What's crazy is that for all their reputation now as the club of Galacticos, their first kits weren't all that. All white, yes, but in the early years they wore black socks, which fans thought looked unlucky, so they switched to blue. And even in the 1940s, they weren't the dominant monster yet. Athletic Bilbao, Barcelona, and Atletico were the bigger names. It wasn't until Santiago Bernabeu stepped in as president that Real Madrid turned into what they are today. He basically invented the blueprint: buy the biggest stars, build the biggest stadium, and make winning in Europe the identity. So yeah, Real Madrid started as a small group of lads, trying out a new sport, got a king's blessing like a few other clubs did, but then they used it to become the football equivalent of the Avengers, Corinthians. Corinthians was literally born out of rebellion. In 1910, a group of 5 railway workers in São Paulo were sick of watching football being this exclusive sport for the rich, where only the elite clubs played and the working class was left out. So they founded Sport Club Corinthians Paulista, inspired by a touring English amateur team, Corinthian FC. The idea was simple: football for the people, by the people. What made Corinthians different wasn't quirky gentlemen's rules, it was their identity. From the very beginning, they became the working class heartbeat of São Paulo, this massive cultural force that was loud, passionate, and unashamedly scrappy. And of course, nothing fueled that identity more than their rivalries. The biggest one is with Palmeiras, and honestly, Derby Paulista is one of the nastiest derbies in world football. It's not just about football, it's politics, immigration, and class all clashing on the pitch. Corinthians was the everyman's club, while Palmeiras was born from Italian immigrants with a sense of superiority. To this day, it feels like a civil war in São Paulo every time they meet. And if that wasn't enough, Corinthians also fight with São Paulo, FC and Santos, so basically their calendar is just one long argument with the entire city and beyond. Napoli. Napoli's origin story is one of those messy ones that feels like a family drama. The club was born in 1926, but it wasn't as simple as a group of locals starting something fresh. It actually goes back to 1905, when an English sailor named William Potts founded the Naples Football and Cricket Club. A few years later, there was a split that led to Internazionale Napoli, because even in Naples they couldn't resist copying Milan's love for football divorces. Eventually, in 1922, the two rivals merged into Internaples, and finally, in 1926 it all became SSC Napoli. So the club was basically stitched together out of British sailors, local Italians, and a lot of drama. The crazy part is that for years, Napoli was considered a southern underdog club compared to the powerhouses up north like Juventus and Milan. The north looked down on Naples, and football became a way to fight back. It was like Napoli was carrying the pride of an entire region on their back every time they played. And even though the Diego Maradona years get all the headlines, that underdog DNA goes right back to their foundation. This wasn't some aristocratic northern club with backing and order. This was chaos, scrappiness, and a little bit of English influence that somehow built a giant. Benfica. Benfica didn't start as some massive Lisbon powerhouse with a stadium that looks like a spaceship. They began in 1904 when a group of students and locals from Lisbon's working-class neighbourhood decided to create their own team. At the time, football in Portugal was dominated by upper-class people who treated it like a posh activity. Benfica was different from the jump, though. They were the team of the people, scrappy, broke, and playing on whatever patch of dirt they could find. What makes their story spicy is that one of the guys who helped form Benfica, Jose Alvalade, ended up leaving the club after just a couple of years because he didn't like the direction it was going. What did he do? He went and founded Sporting CP, Benfica's eternal rival. That's like starting a band with your mates, having a fight, and then creating another band that becomes your lifelong nemesis. And this little fallout turned into the Lisbon derby, one of the most heated rivalries in football. Sporting always had the image of being the classy aristocratic club, while Benfica stayed the people's club, the one everyone in the neighbourhoods got behind. By the 1960s, Benfica wasn't just Portugal's club, they were Europe's problem. Eusebio showed up, and suddenly they were winning European cups and giving Real Madrid nightmares. But then came the curse. Bela Gutmann, their legendary coach, who got denied a pay rise after winning 2 European Cups and supposedly cursed the club, saying they wouldn't win another European title for 100 years. And to this day, every time they reach a final and lose, Portuguese fans bring up that curse like it's real. So, Benfica's story is basically being born out of street football, stabbed in the back by one of their own founders, becoming a European powerhouse, and now living under one of the most famous football curses in history. If that doesn't make them interesting, nothing does. Eintracht Frankfurt. German football is full of industrial worker clubs and political histories, but Eintracht Frankfurt is just beautifully chaotic. The name itself means unity, but the club was anything but united at the start. It was born from a series of mergers in the early 1900s, split apart in 1927, then remerged in 1969, like some dysfunctional relationship that keeps breaking up and getting back together. But somehow, out of all that mess, they've become one of Germany's most beloved clubs. Their fans call them Die Adler, the Eagles, but the more fitting nickname is Launische Diva, the Moody Diva. And it's perfect, because this team is the definition of unpredictable. One week they're schooling Bayern, the next they're tripping over themselves against a team fighting relegation. Supporting Eintracht is basically like dating someone with a split personality. It's exciting, but stressful as hell. And then there's their big claim to history, the 1960 European Cup final against Real Madrid. They lost 7-3. But the game is still called one of the best ever. Imagine losing by 4 goals and still being remembered fondly. Only Eintracht could pull that off. That mix of chaos, passion and drama is why their fans are considered some of the most hardcore in Europe. Wimbledon/AFC Wimbledon. If football had a soap opera, Wimbledon would be the main character. The old Wimbledon FC were the crazy gang, a bunch of misfits who bullied their way to an FA Cup win in 1988 against Liverpool. Forget tiki-taka. Their whole identity was chaos. They bullied teams in the tunnel, pulled stunts that bordered on pranks, and kicked their way through games. People either hated them or loved them, and that was the charm. Then came the dark twist. In the early 2000s, the club was relocated to Milton Keynes and basically ripped away from its South London roots. Imagine your club being shipped off to another city entirely. Fans were furious, and instead of just sulking, they said, "Fine, we'll build our own club." That's how AFC Wimbledon was born in 2002. From park pitches and community fundraisers, the fans built a club that climbed all the way back into the Football League. It's one of the most inspiring comebacks in football because it wasn't about money or ownership. It was literally the fans refusing to let their team die. The crazy gang might be gone, but that defiant, chaotic DNA is still there. It's the ultimate middle finger to modern football greed. Borussia Dortmund. Okay. So picture this, a group of teenagers hanging out in a parish church club, playing football under the supervision of a priest. But there was a problem. The problem was, the priest hated football. He thought it was a waste of time and was pushing them more towards religion than sport. Eventually, 40 angry guys basically said, "Nah, we're done with this," walked out of the parish and formed their own club. That's how Borussia Dortmund came to life, out of teenage defiance. Even the name is funny. Borussia wasn't some deep German heritage choice. It was because of a nearby brewery called Borussia Beer. So yeah, Dortmund is essentially named after alcohol, and honestly, that tracks. That rebellious working-class aura never left the club either. Unlike Bayern Munich, who have always had the polished, dominant reputation, Dortmund grew into the loud, fiery underdog team, backed by one of the most passionate fan bases in the world. But it hasn't all been smooth. In 1929, mismanagement nearly bankrupted them. And again in the 1980s, debts piled so high that local fans literally held fundraising campaigns to keep the club alive. Imagine a club as massive as Dortmund today, having to pass the hat around just to survive. That's how close they were to disappearing. And of course, you can't talk about Dortmund without mentioning the Yellow Wall. The Südtribune is a living, breathing symbol of how much this club belongs to its people. Rosenborg BK. You don't really think of Norway as a football powerhouse, right? It's all skiing, Viking history, and the occasional Erling Haaland popping out of nowhere. But then you look at Rosenborg and realise this little club from Trondheim basically carried Norwegian football on its back for decades. Rosenborg started out in 1917 as Sportsklubben Odd, which sounds like something your mate would name his five-a-side team after he's had a few beers in him. They later switched to Rosenborg because, let's be real, no one's scared of playing odd. The funny part is they spent most of their early life being just another small Scandinavian club, bouncing around and never really making waves. Then the 1960s hit and suddenly they figured out how to play. By the 90s, they weren't just winning in Norway, they were dominating. First off, they won 13 straight league titles. That's not even competition, that's bullying. And they weren't just flat-track bullies either. Rosenborg made the Champions League group stages for 11 seasons in a row, and they even beat AC Milan at the San Siro once. Imagine a bunch of Norwegians rocking up in Italy and handing Milan an L. That's like Vikings raiding the south again. What makes Rosenborg fun is they never really became a super club. They stayed very community-driven, and yet they turned into this consistent European nuisance. And speaking of clubs carrying their whole country's flag, let's go over to Denmark, FC Copenhagen. Now, FC Copenhagen is a weird one because they're not some ancient club with a century of tradition. They're actually a 90s baby, born in 1992. But here's the twist. They were created from a merger of two of Denmark's oldest clubs, København's Bold Club and B1903. That's like if Everton and Liverpool said, yeah, let's just join forces, which would never happen because Scousers would riot in the streets. The whole idea was to build a club that could actually compete in Europe, because Danish football had history, but not much consistency. And Copenhagen didn't just become a solid club, they became the club. In a league where everyone else kind of fights over scraps, they just built a monopoly. You either support FCK or you hate FCK, there's no middle ground. Their story gets even better when you look at the rivalry they sparked. The new firm derby with Brøndby is one of the most intense in Scandinavia. Brøndby was already big before Copenhagen came along, so imagine their faces when this shiny new Franken club came together and immediately started taking over. It was instant beef, and the kind of beef that spills into everything. Politics, class, city pride. And let's not pretend, part of why Copenhagen feels so big is because of Parken Stadium. That place is massive for Danish football, and it basically turned them into the face of the whole game, nationally. The irony is that a club stitched together in the 90s ended up outshining all the old Danish giants with centuries of history. It's like skipping the queue at a nightclub and getting the VIP booth, while people who are regulars stay outside. Football's giants didn't all begin as giants. Some came from teenagers in schoolyards, others from sailors, workers, or fans refusing to give up. That's why these origin stories matter. They remind us that behind every powerhouse club is a messy beginning. Which of these clubs has the best origin story to you? Drop it in the comments, and if you're into more of football's wild history, make sure you stick around because we've got plenty more coming.